Hi there. Again, I'm Mark Hopkins. Thank you for staying with us. I've got three very interesting panelists who will join us in just a second to talk about the future of the workforce. So let me introduce you to them. First is Sarah Oppenhuizen, who is Director of Interiors with HOK Chicago Studio. HOK is one of the largest leading global architecture firms. When I was helping to design this panel, we were looking for someone with specific kind of global experience in designing places that people work. And one of Sarah's colleagues described her as the rock star of interiors. So I'm very happy that she's here. And she's worked from literally Minnesota to Moscow, where she was involved with her team on the development of the interiors of the US Embassy in Moscow. So I found that a very interesting perspective. Also joining us, Farzan Praying is Executive Director of the Building Owners and Managers Association of Chicago. His membership own and manage these giant buildings off to my shoulder here, and he represents their interests in front of all the main audiences you can imagine the building owners and managers want to represent them for. So thank you for joining us, Farzan. And last but not least, George Powers is Chief Human Resource Officer with the Zurn Water Solutions. They are a global company. Virtually everyone in America is in close proximity to a Zurn product every day, even though we might not know it. So whether it's water supply lines in the walls, drains on the roof, public restrooms in institutional hospitality, industrial settings, many of us are actually everyone's close to a Zurn product every day. My personal favorite, as I mentioned earlier to our friends here, they make PEX water supply systems, which is a polymer-based replacement for copper piping. So at a time when commodity prices are up, we have a new product, very high tech, that is actually more durable. So that's my introduction of the three. So to this morning, I'd like to give you each a chance, just a few minutes to tell us a little about yourself, your company, and your perspective on kind of the future of the physical workplace. Let's start with you, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Oppenhuizen, thrilled to be with you today. As Mark noted, I am the Director of Interiors for HOK Chicago. I've been with the organization for over 15 years now, working in all types of markets and all disciplines, from aviation to interiors, and doing corporate strategy, all the way through change management and everything in between. And our firm does a lot of thought leadership, specifically around a lot of the points that Jamie noted in his keynote about how does all of these issues about the future of work manifest itself in space. So I have a few slides. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and share those. Just let me pull that up. All right. So we've been thinking a lot about work going forward, and we really have an opportunity here, as we see it, to embrace the disruption that's happening as a result of COVID. But really, honestly, this was occurring in the market pre-COVID, and it was just accelerated by the pandemic. So we think about a lot of the factors, and we think about beyond returning to the office. And that with work from home coming up on its almost second year for many of us, we're seeing a lot of cracks, right? Certainly around wellness, sustainability, social inequity, and others that we need to think about more holistically. And we need to take time to examine that before we go back to the space. So we're kind of focusing on, big 5 items, because there is no one-size-fits-all answer for everyone, unfortunately. But there are these big 5 items that we think we need to challenge going back into the workplace. And so obviously health and safety, the mix of remote work from home, and the future of flexibility, business resiliency, purpose of place, and then of course, environmental, social, and governance. Long-lasting influences of COVID that we're seeing. We talked about increased remote work programs. I'm just going to touch on a few of these that I think are really interesting. Enhanced HVAC systems, really thinking about choice and flexibility as well. And I think that's key as we look at the drivers for real estate. Technology is a big one. And then, of course, also visitors and how we're having people come back into our spaces. So one of the key things that we're thinking about again, back to those factors beyond returning to the office, is a whole structure around our workplaces. And so we're working with a lot of clients on this idea of a home, spoke, and hub solution that gives people flexibility and fits certain needs overall. So the home, obviously, we've all been, we all know what the home is at this point, and that works for some people and it doesn't work for others. Enforcing the culture of a company and engagement is a challenge at home. And that's why having a spoke, and so these are more remote locations that are likely closer to your population, that are an opportunity for you to have a professional environment, for people to get together, but maybe it's not commuting all the way into the hub, which would really be the place that's of innovation and the hub of your corporate culture, likely in a city center, but really about reinforcing the culture of the community and really being the primary place for client engagement. So we really think about this as an opportunity to design the experience and not just the environment.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I appreciate that. And this was a very focused kind of the beginning of our conversation. We focused on work in offices, and George has an interesting perspective because his organization is office-based and industrial and manufacturing-based. So we'll hear from that in a second. But first, Farzan, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your perspective of this, representing the people who own and run these large, basically hub facilities.
Sure. Thank you for having me again. I'm Farzan Praying. I'm the executive director of BOMA Chicago. So as Mark mentioned, our membership expands to some institutional buildings like IITs and Northwestern and Museum of Science Industry, but our concentration is the office sector downtown. So I think just keeping kind of with the theme that as we're figuring out what is the work of the future work and hub and spoke and all those models, we look at it a lot in terms of what is that impact in location, right? This is a real estate industry, so location matters. And I thought it would be kind of helpful to walk very briefly through sort of the state of our downtown right now, which, as everybody, no one is going to be surprised. We have many challenges, but I also think there's always room for opportunity. So our vacancy levels right now are almost, I think, 16%, which is the highest in about 15 years. And subleasing, which is another marker of people wanting to get out of their office space, is the highest I think it's ever been since we've started recording it. And you're kind of seeing that mirrored, obviously, in occupancy of office spaces. So we've been tracking downtown in particular. We got as high as about 22% headcount occupancy in our buildings in July, August. And we were anticipating and hearing from tenants that we would get about 50% post Labor Day. And obviously, because of Delta variant, we actually dropped a little bit to about 19%, and we're hovering around 19-20% right now. So a kind of interesting trend is that occupancy is now diverging from, specifically in office occupancy is diverging from other markers of recovery. So transit, for example, is about 51%, the latest numbers I saw, I think a week or two ago, and still pretty steadily rising, where we've sort of seemed like we're stalling out a little bit in office occupancy. Parking, I think, is about 75% is the latest number I saw, relative to 2019. So more driving, obviously. People are back to work a little bit, not back to activity more than they are back to office spaces, which I think is, the subject of all of this. So why that matters for the region beyond just to the office real estate industry. So, prior to the pandemic, we had about 600,000 people a day coming to work from all over the region in our downtown because of office primarily. We have about the fourth highest percentage of office in our downtown compared to our other cities in the country. It's about 68% of our square footage is office-based. So that's a huge force multiplier for practically every sector of our economy, right? I mean, people come here to work, they go out to buy lunches, they take people out for dinners, they support the theater afterwards. In fact, entire residential neighborhoods like River North and even going further west, it's a cycle, but we're obviously of the view that that's sort of promoted most or created from office workers going there and taking people to clients there. And that sort of springs up a lot of interest for residential, which then obviously feeds back into office. So I think in terms of challenges are pretty clear. In terms of opportunities, in a very hyper local scale, we're seeing a shift across the country that sort of prime tech-driven submarkets in general are rebounding in terms of investor interest, closer to what they were pre-pandemic, faster than the rest of sort of downtowns and office sectors. And so we're good in the sense that Fulton Market is one of those, and it's increasing in terms of interest. So we're still in the game on a hyper-local sector of our downtown. In terms of macro level, other sectors like apartments are generally actually doing well. And that's an opportunity to re-examine what the sort of diversity of downtown is a bit. I think we definitely have room. We were expanding in terms of residential downtown prior to the pandemic. We definitely have room to do that more. I think that's not without challenges. Residential character is very different from office in terms of its impact on the rest of the economy. But there's an opportunity there to have our downtown be a little bit more 24/7, have a little bit more resiliency probably. And I think the challenge there too, and the opportunity is to figure out how to do that in a way that you're creating new value for the office market as well, where you're again creating environments and atmosphere, not just inside buildings, but also in the whole area of downtown, so that you're working our way back a little bit towards that force multiplier, because I think it's a critical thing, not only for Chicago, but our entire economy.
Great, thank you very much. And I live in the Loop, so I can tell you from personal experience that I've seen the changes in the numbers. I've only lived here since July, but I've seen the changes in the numbers that have been dramatic in the last few months, really. So I find that part fascinating, and it's interesting to hear the perspective of the people who actually own these giant towers. I know I was meeting with the people from the city who were talking about the potential 40% vacancy on LaSalle Street alone. It's how that corridor would dramatically shift and change, and what that means to the whole personality and tenor of the neighborhood and the businesses that are there. And so that's one of those kind of interesting discussions. A little bit of a pivot. George, as I mentioned, is really in the manufacturing world that makes the products that we all touch all the time. So you have kind of two ends to your responsibility. You have the people who work in your offices, and yet you have all the workplace that's where they actually make all these things. So tell us what you think about that from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. As I was listening to Sarah and Farzin, a lot resonated. And it also brought back, these past 18 months, what a journey this has been for an industrial manufacturer. As you say, we have workforces that are located both in office, traditional environments, and then also on the manufacturing floor. And if I go back to pre-pandemic, early 2020, I would describe Zurn's workplace as a bit traditional, fairly conservative, not a lot of formal policies around workplace flexibility, work from home, very, very traditional. Really a culture of you need to be seen. We need to see you every day. So I would say when the pandemic hit, it really rocked our world, like many industrial manufacturing companies. We were also, I think, very important to note, probably in the early innings of digitization and how we leverage technology across how work gets done across the different workplaces. And I'm sure you'll go into this conversation in your next segment on workforce, but a lot to be learned. So what happened when the pandemic hit? We had to respond and react like many organizations. We immediately, had a couple of goals in mind. First and foremost, the safety and health of our associates. Business continuity. We were identified as an essential business in the type of products and what we manufacture and sell. So we had to maintain business continuity. And then we wanted to make sure that we were able to engage our employees in a completely different environment. So I would say we learned a lot. We tried things that worked. We tried some things that didn't work from the standpoint of what we did in the workplace. We, like a lot of organizations, immediately tried to leverage as much work from home, virtual technology. We tried some communication techniques, things like Yammer, trying to keep people engaged. In the manufacturing setting, it was very different. Obviously, we couldn't send people home, so we had to pivot around what can we do with those goals in mind, safety and health. So immediately we had to start thinking about work relayout, take things like social distancing into account. How do you work in a completely different environment with a mask on? We had to make sure we had people safe and healthy when they showed up. So bringing in thermometer, temperature kiosks, making sure everybody was healthy when they showed up. A lot of relaying out the workforce to make people feel comfortable. Nobody knew what was going on at this point in time. And so we wanted to make sure we had, not only the physical safety, but the mental safety of our associates as well. We also invested heavily in mental health training. We would bring experts in. So a lot of respond and react. As I flash forward to where we are now, like Sarah was talking about on one of her slides, we've I would say probably come 180 degrees from a very traditional, you must be here to, we must see you, to we're an organization now implementing hybrid work schedules. We're trying to really strike the balance, and we can talk about this, but the real balance around having flexibility and working from home, but at the same time, having enough collaboration to drive innovation, to drive engagement, enough physical touch points throughout the normal work week.
Thanks very much for that perspective. I want to talk a little bit about kind of some big issues. To me, I was struck at the rapid change in the workplace pre-pandemic, just by natural causes, a kind of natural evolution, if you will. So we were experiencing rapid evolution in the workplace. We saw shifting uses of office space, from office intensive to the open designs where you've got almost hoteling in some circumstances. In the manufacturing world, advances in design and in computer-aided manufacturing drove dramatic changes that you've seen. So thinking about the trends that were occurring pre-pandemic, during and post-pandemic, what do you see as the kind of next direction? Are we seeing another line that's just accelerated? Does the line shift? Or what do you think about that? Farzan, let's talk with you first, starting with you've got the perspective of the owner. What do you think is the next trajectory of that topic?
I think it's jury's a little bit still out, and luckily we have rock stars like Sarah that are thinking through that. I think some of the trends you were seeing before the pandemic, sort of, to your point, hot desking and hoteling and shared, co-working spaces. I think a lot of that took an initial step back because it was shared, but I do think there's a lot of functionality there that will be and continue to be kind of an important part of whatever the future of different office spaces looks like. Same thing in terms of, I think real estate is historically a little bit slow to adopt new technologies. And you were seeing a ton of investment in prop tech, right? Real estate technology companies prior to the pandemic. And I think a lot of that, again, I think even Sarah mentioned it in one of her slides. You now have a lot more tools in the work, in the toolbox for doing things like touchless access or having some other kind of tenant engagement, for example, when people are not necessarily in the office all the time. So I think those things, it's fortuitous, I suppose, that they were starting to develop a lot more immediately prior to the pandemic, because I think they will play a big role. And I think the rest of it's in flux. I think what we are hearing from tenants a lot is they're trying to figure that out. And you've got some folks, as you can imagine, kind of further ahead of the curve than others. But I think it will be relatively specific to what the kind of office use is, culture is. And I think will be exciting. We'll see that in the next few years, certainly.
Thank you. Sarah, what are you thinking?
I think that we're going to see a lot of change in terms of building amenities, some that are provided by the landlord and some that are provided by, the tenants themselves. What we're seeing across our clients is that, almost half are retaining the space that they have. And those who are reducing their space are not doing it significantly, but are really rethinking how they are using their space. And so we talk about, what is the purpose of the office? What is the purpose of that place? And maybe it's that you've got technology that you don't have at home and you have the ability to have, conference call with lots of different people. Maybe it's that you actually finally have some quiet because you've got roommates or kids or dogs at home and that, are constantly disrupting you. But really taking a look at what is drawing people back to the workplace, I think is going to be a key factor on a company by company basis. And what can we offer at the workplace that you can't get at a work from home solution beyond the dynamics of the Zoom call?
I agree with that, and it's interesting because in the office environment, a lot of us are working those. We're all sitting in them now. We've kind of experienced a rapid change in development, and I just think that the gas has been poured on that flame a bit. But as you talked about, there's a lot of different strategy. I think we're really in the midst of the flux part of that. George, in your business, you're the manufacturing guy. What do you think? How is that curve? What do you think the curve is going to look like for your business?
I think what we're learning, and maybe representative of other organizations like us, are some things that we had to do at a necessity during the peak moments of the pandemic. We're now, with flexibility and choice, continuing some of those practices because we learned that they were efficient. For example, a work process of interviewing, hiring, and onboarding in 2020 was almost completely virtual. Pre-pandemic, we would have never even thought of that. We had to see you, we had to interview, we had to assess. So one example of a work process that not only was it quick, it was very efficient. And you think of cost savings, or from the standpoint of some things that we learned we can do, leveraging technology. And that's how we were able to do that. A simple workflow, work process that was more manual pre-pandemic is now completely automated. Our products on the manufacturing floor are getting smarter. As we were talking before the call, some of what we make is now sensor enabled, smart product, data analytics, and I'm sure you'll go into this with your workforce conversation, completely different skill sets and work processes on the manufacturing floor. So I think that technology curve, both in work process, in communication, keeping people engaged and collaborating in different ways, and then actually how you're embedding the man to machine interface, the MMI, in much different ways to keep up with technology is what we're seeing, which is going to revamp how we think about technical schools, partnerships, skill sets coming into the workforce.
Thank you for that. I got an email yesterday from someone who was attending today, and they asked me a question. I think this might be an interesting time to put it. And they are having challenges with their multiple locations, and that they have varying degrees of government regulation about mask mandates and all the other things that would be in the physical workspace. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk to you all about that, because you've got different perspectives. George has the big organization that's all over the place. Sarah works with the clients all over the world, and Farzin, you're very focused on Chicago. George, we'll start with you. How do you deal with the kind of different and changing landscape of regulation of your employees by different government entities? Since we talked earlier, Greg mentioned that we have thousands of government entities here. In the service area for the Alliance for Regional Development, we have over 1,800 government groups that affect business here. So how do you deal with that, George?
I think it's a bigger topic. I think it's a trend that what we're seeing is less being a global organization. And if I just take the United States, being less corporate policy driven going forward and more local, be it employee driven from the standpoint, working in partnership with communities. But I'll answer your question more from the standpoint of the problem that you threw out, but more of an approach going forward. And where we see things is less things coming out of our headquarters in Milwaukee saying this is how we're going to approach things, because of the reality, like you bring up, Mark, state to state, county to county. In some cases, when we were in the peak of COVID, there were different rules and different regulations. And I think that's not only from a governance standpoint, but from an employee engagement perspective. What motivates and drives and engages people in Paso Robles, California is different in Erie, Pennsylvania, and two of our sites. What we're trying to do is put more approach and attention at the local level with task forces and employee resource groups to bubble up recommendations to solve not only problems, but create growth opportunities.
Thank you for that. Sarah, you work kind of globally. So what's your impression of that? Let me hear.
It's very similar to George's impression that, taking a local approach when it comes to those regional mandates, which, can change with a high level of frequency, is really the most effective way to do that. But as we're working with clients who are global, what we're doing is working with the HR leadership like George about how do you support these regional mandates within the culture of your organization, and so that there is some level of consistent messaging across the organization, but that there are certain things that are driven by the regional focus. And I think that expands beyond just the mask mandates for the workplace of the future. I think I think that having that local feel, regardless of what, and the local input, regardless of what the global brand strategy is an important thing for employees in their regional market to feel connected to their office as well as the larger brand.
I agree with that. Thank you very much. And Farzin, you in some ways have it easier. You're a kind of a I wouldn't say one municipality, but one city focus. So you have a little bit easier time because you're one government entity who kind of drives your policies. But they've been going up and down. I've been here through several changes of that. So how do your members react to that? And do they ask you, are they happy? And again, I know you're speaking as a whole, and there will all be different people, but are they happy for the direction, or do they try to supply their own perspectives to the government in their decision-making processes?
We are certainly very involved. I mean, our association has, aside from people who operate the buildings, we have a whole network of building code experts and engineering and folks who are very reliable resources. And so we're always engaged with all of our government agencies on these sort of topics, because the average decision maker on the policy level doesn't necessarily know as much about elevator ventilation as our folks do. So we're certainly engaged. I think even though it might on paper seem like it should be simpler because there is one jurisdiction, I would echo a little bit of what Sarah said, in that it's very fluid and becoming increasingly fluid. In fact, we were just on having a conversation with the mayor's office and our public health department here about, we had this metric for the mask mandate. I think it was 400 new cases a day. And once we kind of got under that, there was going to be a re-examination. And we were having this conversation about, we're still seeing potential, right? If this goes down, we're anticipating kind of a fall with flu and all these other things. If it comes back up, if we maybe get rid of the mask mandate and then we have another one in 3 weeks, is that bad? Is it better to just not remove the mask mandate? And I think the general, from not just our folks, but a lot of the other trade associations, commercial, representation, is it's better at this point to kind of unlock from these very strict, and it's going to be fluid. And certainly in a mechanical perspective, we have all the signage, we can bring those in and out. And I think it's worthwhile to note too, in this conversation, it's not really just government that is driving that fluidity. You have a wide range of tenants, of companies that are saying, nobody come into our space unless you're vaccinated, or no, it's vaccinated and some mix of testing, or, masking is fine. So it kind of goes to that, we're slowly in the beginning of all this, for whatever reason, corporate decisions around office reoccupancy were based on holidays. These sort of almost, everyone was saying, July 4th, we're coming back, Labor Day, Memorial Day, whatever it was. And I think certainly with the latest, Delta variant, and I think we're unlocking from that more, and it will just be more fluid and more based on individual companies and their own cultures and their own people. So I think that's okay. I think that's, I'm hoping we see that more fluid but gradual increase, as opposed to these sort of big steps anticipation. But you live with it. I mean, that's
exactly the people. We are in professional offices, and for years I've worked in professional offices, and my kind of heart goes out to those who are that next tier of the economy, who are based on the people in the offices. So there's a food court literally across the street from me, which has been closed for months and months, and they keep saying we're opening October, we're opening November. So I feel bad for those people. How do you plan for that? How do you order food? How do you get employees? So that's all, I think, a tough one. I wanted to also, what each of you mentioned before, kind of the hybrid work model and those things, and remote work, in-person work, the hybrid model, big topic in all the C-suites. All the executives I talk to are talking about that, and they overlay their own kind of corporate culture and how it fits in, and then they worry about, some people have new employees who've never met a person that they work with, and so you think about that. So what's your impression from your very interesting perspectives about how that fits in your kind of world? We talked a little bit about it before, but thinking right now, I think we're in the midst of the decision-making process. I think we're still synthesizing data that's coming in and the impressions of people who work for us. But so if you could predict the future, let's say 5 years from now, I think we were naturally trending toward a hybrid model, but this has really pushed that. So 5 years from now, do you think what do you think it'll look like? Farzan, I'll start again with you. We'll go backwards from our previous. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it will exist. It will definitely exist. I'm very curious to see how does it wind up stratifying in some way that people who are brand new to the company or to the workforce are more heavily in the office and then maybe less so, and then maybe, I mean, right now, my understanding is obviously it varies a little bit by sector. So technology, I think initially was very much, we want to be sort of together because of innovation, but also are struggling a little bit with their own labor market supply and demand. And so they've stepped back from that. We hear a lot about lawyers, very much the younger folks. They want the younger folks, I think even Greg mentioned it, they want them to be there to be trained, to see everybody, but you also have the older folks that don't like remote work at all. And so they want to be in there. So I wonder if you see maybe some sort of a curve or stratification start to develop, but I think it will depend a lot. I mean, finance folks were very early on saying we want to come back to the office. So I think it will depend on the sector, depend on the company, depend on age. I certainly think it will be part of the landscape 3 to 5 years and beyond.
Thank you for that. Sarah?
There was some interesting data that came out of the IFMA Global Work from Home survey about how, before COVID, about 30% of the population would never work from home. And now that's down to about 7% based on that data, and where 40% of people want to be working remotely at least 2 to 3 days a week. Obviously, some even more than that. And I think that for all the reasons that you noted, in the engagement, particularly among people newer to the workforce and who are really, in the prime of mentorship and learning from, more seasoned individuals, are missing out on that. You have to balance that against people who, found a lot of benefits from the lack of disruption or the ability to have heads down creative work that was a pro from working from home versus the collaboration side of things. So I think that, in terms of what we're seeing right now about how we do have like 40% of people who want to be 2 to 3 days a week at home, I could see that being consistent for a while here as, at least when it comes to more kind of corporate. I'll let George weigh in on the manufacturing side of things about what he sees on that side. But from a corporate workplace, I do see it balancing out as that this 2 to 3 days a week at home, I think, is going to be a consistent thing as we look forward to find a place of balance.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the trend is heading toward that too. George,
Yeah.
How about you? Global business, lots of people in multiple types of work.
Yeah, I would echo the word balance that Sarah ended with from that standpoint. I mean, as I started off, in my introduction, speaking for my organization, pre-pandemic, very conservative, very traditional. The other thing I should have said was, when we had all of our office associates work from home, we were also highly skeptical from a productivity standpoint and results. And we're wondering, what is actually getting done? And month after month, when we saw, in fact, really no drop off in productivity, we became, from skeptical to advocates of, wow, maybe there's something to be said here for a balance of virtual work. I think the balance from a mental health perspective, from collaboration, is going to be important. So I don't see it being all of one schedule or the other. So I think the hybrid is probably here to stay. On the manufacturing side of things, obviously it's a bit different. So what we're trying to do is introduce flexibility where we can, be it scheduling, split shifts, some type of compressed work weeks, some type of part-time option for people working. So trying to introduce flexibility more in a scheduling than obviously where the work is performed from a realistic standpoint. But I do echo, I think, from the standpoint of 18 months ago, we would not have had the mindset now of virtual work and hybrid being sustainable. We've seen it work well. I think the key is going to be striking the right balance going forward.
Right, and in your business, people who manufacture cars or faucets can't work from home, and so it's an interesting almost dichotomy in your business. I'm going to pivot a little bit to talk about kind of the intersection between workplace and workforce. I read a lot of research, and everyone's looking for high quality candidates, and everyone I speak to is talking about how very good people are being headhunted away to other regions or to work from home from big companies in the East and the West who have very high salary levels and they don't have to move, or they just are having trouble finding even entry-level positions because there's so much competition. So I read some interesting research a couple years ago and again today, which had the same kind of answers, and it was asking potential job seekers, people who might consider moving. These are typically in-career people, what their hierarchy of needs are, if you will, for the factors to change. And surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, money wasn't number one. Typically, that was either number two or number three, and many times the number ones were what they call work-life balance, which I think we've addressed here. But the other one was what can be boiled down to a welcoming workplace. And that, as they start to describe it, I found it very interesting because it was really that combination of people and place. So George, let's start with you because you have kind of the most diverse workplace. You've got people who are, working forklifts, people running computer made machines, people running lathes, people, all of that, as well as this professional office worker types who work in the spot where you're sitting now. So what do you think kind of is the right thing in your business to have a welcoming workplace, and how would you see that changing through what we're going through now?
Yeah, I think it goes back, Mark, to being local driven versus here's what Milwaukee is going to give you by way of programs and policies. Yes, there's going to be some things that are systemic that need to be consistent, but wherever possible, we're trying to challenge the paradigm and putting some ownership, the voice of our people, right? And again, the voice of our people from one location to another is different in what is motivating, what the needs are, what kind of flexibility, what engages them. We run annual associate engagement surveys like many companies, but we really try to turn that into understanding at the local level, cut the data, put the information at the local level, and understand what the perspectives are coming out of the local organization. So number one, I think you have to listen to your people at the local level to understand what really matters. From the standpoint of challenging paradigms, back to what we're trying to do is challenge where does the work actually need to be performed. And if it's a manager's preference, I need that person in my office because it's a preference versus a necessity. You open up your talent pool dramatically by having flexibility of where that work is performed in an office setting, right? If it's one region of the country versus roles have to be in a specific office. So really challenging when a role is identified, the basics, the things we used to take for granted. Well, of course, it's got to be here in this office. Does it really? Or can that person perform the role where they are today, not needing to relocate, disrupt their family and their work environment? So challenging, some traditional paradigms, number one, and then really try to get the voice of our people at the local level versus taking a corporate perspective.
Completely forgetting the unmute button today. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Farzin, you represent the people who provide the physical workplace. So what do you see in this area?
I think it's a mixture of some things we've already talked about, sort of what kind of amenities are you offering? How are they changing? It's I think a fair amount of it is broader than within the office too. I mean, we've talked a little bit about that balance, and childcare, for example, was a major driving factor a lot over summers, et cetera. What's school going on for people's ability to have heads down time at home, or just their desire and need to get out of the house. I think there's taking half a step back, there's a parallel question that on a policy level, we don't want to lose density, right? There's a whole conversation about work and hub and spoke and everything, and work productivity in terms of work from home. But I think there's also a conversation we are having and should continue to be having about sort of the downtown area, and what is it that's welcoming about the entire downtown for folks who, maybe they could go one place, they could go the other, maybe they just don't like the commute, and that's leaving them at home. And it's not necessarily some question of productivity or childcare or a balance question. We should be looking towards those opportunities to make them want to, prefer to be down here, again, for all of those sort of spin-off benefits of that density. So I think there's multiple layers to it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I have to agree with both George and Farzan about that. This is a very multi-layered question about how you create a welcoming workplace. And so, just for the purposes of time, because we could talk about this, I'm sure, for hours, I wanted to focus on, the actual workplace itself that we're creating and how to make that welcoming. And so we've been doing a lot of research recently at HOK around neurodiversity. And really what that came from was one client asking us, how do you design a space to be attractive for somebody who's on the autism spectrum? And really what that opened for us is this whole world of designing for people who actually are diagnosed on the scale of, hypersensitive or hyposensitive. But really what the designing for that flexibility and the choice of different spaces, right? So some individuals might like the buzz and the background noise and being in a Starbucks type setting, right? Where there's the music and people around you and it's very vibrant, but others would benefit more from something very quiet, very calm, that while it certainly benefits, those who are diagnosed hyposensitive and hypersensitive, it actually has the benefit of working well for anyone and everyone. And it goes back to that diversity, equity, and inclusion within the space, providing flexibility and choice within the workspaces, and really designing with a much wider scope of people in mind, can truly help companies with their talent search and with retention of quality individuals within their workplaces.
Thank you for that. We've only got a couple minutes, but there was one question that I got by email that was interesting. Sarah, you mentioned amenities before. I think we all think about that when we're looking at developments where you would put your facilities, all of that. And and some tenants or companies are bringing in their own amenities. So things like you mentioned childcare, the other issues that people always recognize that they would like to work from home for. Do you consider adding your own, George? Farzin, do you see your members adding them to their buildings to make them more attractive? Sarah, do you see people coming through there? We've only literally got 2 minutes left. So let's start with Sarah. We'll go to Farzin and then up to George.
Oh, so I think it's a balance, right? That, that corporate real estate strategy decisions are important in terms of balancing what's the landlord providing versus what our individual company is providing. And so, we see, of course, there are coffee shops and outdoor spaces and those kind of amenities that can be part of building lobbies and really create places of connection that can be provided by the landlord that appeal to everyone. But if you've got a company that, you've got a bunch of dog lovers or you've got, a bunch of music lovers as part of your company, then maybe there's amenities that are specific to your organization that you're providing that are really based on the demographics of it.
So do you see people asking for those now from you yet? So would you add a childcare center? Would you add
oh, absolutely.
So things that are kind of above and beyond the standard level of amenity of an A building, you would put them in their own personal spaces.
It's possible. Yeah, we've got clients who are asking for those kinds of spaces. Yeah.
Right. Farzin, our sister organization, the Chicago Central Area Committee, we work with lots of urban planners and architects, and they've worked on all the kind of changes of the big buildings, the renovation of Willis Tower, the work on the old post office. And so they've been adding a bunch of unique amenities. Do you see that as the trend? And do you see them bringing in other things that more like you would have in your neighborhood at home to try and attract people to come back downtown?
Yes, for purposes of time management, yes. And just to give you an example, it kind of goes both ways to what Sarah was saying. You're seeing, I think it was Willis was telling me the other day, a lot of companies are not providing any more of their sort of internal cafe or cafeteria spaces. They're kind of outsourcing that to the building. So yeah, it will be a constant dialogue and development for sure.
Thank you. And George, your kind of motto of localization is good and probably the most productive. Do you see are you doing this now? Do you bring some amenities to your locations, or are you trying to make your locations closer to where people are?
A combination of both. And we're trying things, be it laundry service, be it childcare, right? We're trying to, again, not to sound like a broken record, listen to what really is important at the local level, and where it's practical, we're certainly trying to do that. But it's a combination of both, and we have to be practical from the standpoint of, a lot of our locations, we don't have the critical mass, right? From the standpoint of being able really to leverage some services that would make sense.
Wow. Well, first, thank you very much, all three of you, for a wonderful conversation. Sarah, Farzin, George. It was wide ranging and comprehensive, and I do appreciate it. And I think the perfect lead into our next panel talks about workforce itself, workforce development. I think some of the big takeaways, locally driven is one of them. We've come through an 18-month kind of adventure together, and that we've seen that kind of accelerate the kind of level and sometimes direction of change. So thank you very much for your participation on the panel.